Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today is Friday, so I'm here to do my Friday reads. So I'm gonna talk to you about the books that I read this week, the books that I finished this week, the books that I'm in the middle of reading right now, and the books I'm about to begin reading perhaps. So let me tell you about the books that I've read this week. So the first book that I wanted to talk to you about is Soif by Amélie Nothomb, which is a book that I started reading last week. So I already talked a little bit about it last week on Friday Read. So I don't want to say much more about it because really my thoughts were already in that previous video. I finished it and I loved it. I thought it was a fun, interesting look at the last few days in the life of Jesus Christ before the crucifixion. If you're a fundamentalist Christian, read it and have a bad time. If you're not a fundamental Christian, read it and have a great time. I guess I was in the mood for French literature because I also finished reading Bel Ami by Guy de Maupassant. Guy de Maupassant is a French writer from the 19th century, and it's one of those names that I always knew about. You know, he's one of those famous writers. Even if you don't know anything about French literature, I'm sure you've heard about Guy de Maupassant. So a few months ago, I picked up his novella Boule de Suif, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was perfection. I thought it was the best short story or novella that I had ever read. So since then, I've been meaning to go back to his writing, and Bel Ami is his most famous novel. So I picked it up and I couldn't stop reading it. I loved it. It's the story of a scoundrel that goes by the name of Georges Duroy. Then later on he changes his names. He goes through women. He's overambitious, he's mediocre, he has no talent other than the talent to seduce women and go up in life. It's such a cynical look at the world of the 19th century, which it isn't that different from the world we live in today. So I would really recommend this book. I think it's a true classic in the sense that it would talk to us, it would speak to us almost as clearly and as loudly and it spoke to people when it was first published. It's gorgeously written. It's a realist take on the living conditions of the bourgeoisie and what it takes to make it into the bourgeoisie and go up every single scale within it. You know, I couldn't recommend this book enough. Bel Ami by Guy de Maupassant. I read it in French, you can read it in English, you can read it in any language you'd like because it's been translated and it's widely available in any translation, not in any translation, in translation into any and every language. And now I wanted to talk about the Booker Prize because it already feels like a long time ago, but early this week we finally had a Booker Prize winner. Or did we? Actually, we had two Booker Prize winners. We had Margaret Atwood for The Testaments, which I already read and reviewed on this channel, and we had Bernardine Evaristo, who wrote Girl, Woman, Other. Now, you know that I'm doing my Booker Through the Decades project, so I'm reading all the books that have won the Booker Prize, but I'm doing it so by decade. So I started with the current decade, and I'm currently reading Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James, okay? And I'll talk about that one in a second. So yeah, I'm working my way up to Girl, Woman, Other. So I will read it when I get to it because I have to read all the previous winners. I think I have 3 winners. Well, 4 if we count the one that I'm currently reading until I can get to it. So I don't know when I'll get to Girl, Woman, Other. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not gonna jump over my TBR. No, I'm gonna continue with my plan. So I might read it later on this year or early next year. I don't know. And I actually finished a Booker Prize winning novel this week, and that was The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan. And I'm sorry if I looked away from the camera because the title is so long that I was afraid I would get it wrong, but I didn't. Okay, so this is an Australian novel and it won the Booker Prize. That's why I read it, and you know, I struggled with it, and I think I said that last week on my previous Friday reads, and I struggled with it because it's not a novel. It didn't deal with anything that interests me a lot. I struggled with that, and it made me think about this project, and it almost made me think that it might be a good idea to quit the project. But then I'm not going to do that ultimately. I'm going to continue with it because I think that would be really stupid. But the reason why it made me think that is that The Narrow Road to the Deep North is not a book that I would have picked up if it weren't for this project. If I read what it was about, it's not something that interests me. It's just that, and I'm sure as a reader you understand what I'm talking about. There are books that you think, well, yeah, fine, it won the Booker Prize, it won the Nobel Prize, it won whatever prize, or maybe you don't care about prizes and you probably be wise not to. But anyway, there are books that are highly acclaimed by critics and you think, oh, and then maybe I should read it. And then you find out what it's about or you start reading it and you think, yeah, okay, it's fine, it's well written, but it's not, I don't care. So that's the feeling that I had reading this book. I have nothing to object about the style or how it was written, but it's not a book that I feel ultimately that I needed to read. And for someone like me who has a really long list of backlisted books that I want to read, reading something like this didn't actually make sense. And it only made sense because of my project. I'm afraid I can't say much more about the book. But if you're curious, it's well written. Go see what it's about. See if you want to read it. But also if, I'm really interested here. If you've read The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan, and you want to tell me what you loved about the book, I'd love to hear it. Because maybe I read it wrong, and I'm not being facetious here. There was a video, or there have been a few videos and comments on Twitter about, booktubers being told, you haven't read this right. You didn't get the book. You didn't read it right. And I think a lot of the times those comments are not helpful, and most times they're directed toward women, and so they're really misogynistic deep down. I mean, that's the kind of the motivation for them. But I think there are different ways of reading a book, So I'm not talking about that controversy, which I think it's very misogynistic, and not the controversy, but that kind of attitude is very misogynistic. I'm not talking about that. I think there are very different ways of approaching a book. And I think that it also depends on the individual reader and where he or she is at the moment and where he or she has read before. Also, it has to do with the expectations that we have on a certain book. So many things. So it is possible. I do believe it is possible to read something wrongly. I think. And perhaps this is the case. Perhaps I read this book wrongly. So if you love it, and if you want to tell me why you love it or what you think is great about this book, I'm more than willing to further down the line give it another go. Because maybe I had the wrong set of expectations. That's what I mean by reading it wrong. It has nothing to do with my gender or my background, which, I think a lot of those criticisms are geared towards. So I'm not talking about that. But anyway, I feel like I'm ranting here and babbling, so I'm gonna leave my discussion on, reading things wrongly or rightly there. And another book that I started recently that I've been reading this week with a lot of attention, and now that I've finished Guy de Maupassant's Bellamy, I'm gonna spend a lot of time on, I think, until I finish it, is Baltasar and Blimunda by José Saramago. I'm reading it in the original Portuguese, so the original title is Memorial do Convento. I like the Portuguese title better than the English one, but the English title makes sense, and I think it's a little bit more commercial or whatever, but it is still true to the work. This reread, I read this book years and years ago when I first encountered Saramago's work, and I loved it. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm about 15%, and yeah, I love it so far. I hope to finish it soon. I don't know if I'll finish it this week or on the weekend, so I'll be able to talk to you about it on my next Friday reads. But as soon as I finish it, you can count on a review on my channel. And yes, if you've made it this far, well, congratulations. But also, you're probably wondering, about Middlemarch and about Victober, because none of the books that I've talked about here fit into Victober, and none of the books that I've talked about featured in my Victober TBR. So what is happening with Victober, and what is happening? Indeed, what is happening is that I think I'm gonna fail Victober. To be honest with you, I'm reading Middlemarch. Well, I'm not reading Middlemarch. I started Middlemarch at the beginning of the book. I hit 30% of it and I've stopped reading it. Okay, I'm not gonna bail. I'm not gonna give up. I'm gonna go back and finish Middlemarch. And I want to finish it within this month, so before the end of October. Now, how about the other 3 books? Because I also had Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I also had Thackeray's Vanity Fair, and Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. So what about those books? Will I be able to read them in October? Well, I'll try at least Villette. I don't know about the other 2. But I'll read them, I'll get to them, even if it's in November, even if it's in December, I'll get to them because those are Victorian books that I want to read. But Middlemarch, yes, I need to go back to it. So please send me waves of motivation and goodwill because I really need to finish Middlemarch. I really need to go back to it. I loved it. I loved the first 30%, 20%, 25%, 30%, but I don't know why. This always happens to me. I dropped it, I read something else, and then I find it really hard to go back to it because I get distracted with so many shiny books, either new or from the backlist. So what do I do to go back to Middlemarch? I don't know, but please, please help me. I need to go back to Middlemarch and finish it. Anyway, thanks for indulging my Friday reads. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you had an amazing weekend, and I hope you read a lot of books, a lot of great books on the weekend. Please let me know what books you've been reading, what books you're gonna read on the weekend. And of course, if you wanna talk to me and to each other about any of the books that I've mentioned in this video, that's what the comment section is all about. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Goodbye.